So another important set of definitions is what we're going to tackle here in 1.3. Population, sample, parameter, and statistics. So the population is the group we want to know about. So this little drawing is really great. So these are all the people we want to know about. A lot of the time it's not possible to get information from everyone we want to know about. So it is feasible or more feasible to take a sample. So we randomly select people and we create a sample. Now, a measurement from our population is what we call a parameter. So here they've given us one example, which is the population mean. We denote it with this Greek letter called mu. And if you take that same value from a sample, if you take a bunch of people, say test scores, and average them from a sample, we call that a statistic. And for the mean, that's denoted with an X bar. But for right now, the thing we care the most about is these four definitions: population, the group we want to know about; sample, the group we actually collect information on; and then our parameter and our statistic, our measurements from those two different groups, respectively. So we'll continue on. I'll go ahead. I'm not going to break up the video because that would be a really short one, and do exercise 1.3.1 together. So I replaced a very outdated example this semester with one that is much more relevant. So America First Polling held two surveys after the allegations against Roy Moore. One was soon after, one slightly later. So you can see November 13th through 15th, they did one survey where there was 41% of people, of potential voters in support of Roy Moore, and then another one 2 weeks later-ish, November 26th to 28th, where now 46% of people said that they were going to vote for Roy Moore. So kind of the whole point of why they did these two was to show that like the backlash from those allegations against him had sort of leveled out again. Now, they surveyed 600 voters and they did a split sample. They got a quarter of them from landline, a quarter from cell phone, and a half from the internet. Now, if you want to know more about this sampling that went on here and why it was so difficult in Alabama, I provided you guys two different links. So you can go to Blackboard and access the links from the PDF, or I'll link them as well in the Part 1 section. But the reason why they did this, what we call a split sample, or more of a stratified sample, was because if you only sample people via landline, which is what they did in a couple of the polls that are mentioned in the one article, then you're going to get a predominantly older, different demographic than what exists in Alabama, because the people who have landlines tend to be older. So anyways, they got all of this and found a margin of error of 4%. So using this November 26th through 28th survey, I want us to identify those four different pieces. So again, just like in all the other videos, I'd like you to pause, try this on your own, and then we'll come back and see if you got it right. So the population is who we want to know about. So in this case, our population were Alabama. That is not how you spell Alabama, my God. Alabama, it's not a hard word. Voters, specifically those people who are going to vote in the special election this December. The sample, well, we know that they talked to 600 Alabama voters. And if we really wanted to get specific, we could talk about how those 600 voters were actually found. So 150 from landline, 150 from cell phone, and 300 from the internet. The parameter, well, parameter is usually something we don't know. And in this case, it's a little bit complicated because there's three different things they measured, right? They measured proportion voting for Roy Moore, for Doug Jones, and also for undecided, right? So I'm going to make this a little simpler, and let's ignore the undecided, and let's just say that our parameter of interest was the proportion or percent of people voting for Roy Moore. So I'm overly simplifying it just because it's going to make our lives a lot easier and ties in better to what we do in Part 6. So if you want to talk about this parameter, this proportion of people voting for something, we usually denote this in statistics with a P. For this is our proportion. Now the statistic, based on this survey, we would have said 46% are voting for Roy Moore, right? So our actual statistic based on our sample was 46% voting for Roy Moore. This, by the way, just like our mu and x bar doesn't matter so much now, but just you see it once before we get there. This is our p hat. We call this our sample proportion, our statistic. In the end, by the way, the actual value, which a lot of times we do not actually have, we have to wait until after the poll, or sometimes we'll never actually have the value. It turned out that 48% of people voted for Roy Moore. 50% voted for Doug Jones, which is why this ended up with Doug Jones winning. But you can actually see, if you think about what their margin of error is at 4%, that is reasonable, right? Margin of error means that we think it's 46% plus or minus 4%. It's a little, again, a little more complicated, especially with this 5% undecided in there. But this is a sort of idea of where we're headed. We're going to start using our sample data, this 46%, to get us a measurement of what's really going to happen in the long run. Can we make a conclusion about what all Alabama voters are going to do?